About a week after my post, I planted a wall of blackberries and raspberries at the two sides of my garden facing the driveway. About 30 centimeters from the edge, so no overhanging branches. On the other side of the berry wall, I planted lots stuff like strawberries and tomatoes. To reach the tomatoes and strawberries from the driveway, you have either go through the fruit bushes or walk up to my house. Walk about 2 m along the side of the house and my windows, and then walk into my actual garden. Not something you do by mistake. For about 2 weeks it was somewhat quiet, but I still found the kids on my driveway every single days. As far as I know, they did not enter the garden, and I hadn't noticed them walking around my house anymore. So I figured the bushes were working. About 1 week ago, berry season started, and my bushes are now full of raspberries, and there's lots of strawberries as well. The neighbors noticed. First I caught the boys picking and eating raspberries, so I told them off and dropped them off at home, told their mom I caught them stealing. That's how I see it, even though it's fruit, and that I'd call the cops next time. She huffed and told me to grow up, but took the boys inside anyway. After that it was quiet up until yesterday afternoon, when I went out for a while and found the dad and his 2 sons right in the middle of my garden when I returned, clearing my bushes and plants. I didn't even confront them. Just called the cops from a distance as they hadn't noticed me yet, and started filming them after making the call. Luckily 2 cops showed up after 10 minutes or so, and they confronted the neighbor as they were still picking berries. They told them they were trespassing and that the berry picking was in fact considered stealing, and that I could press charges. For the first time I noticed a bit of fear in my neighbor. He was having trouble finding his words and kept looking back at his house. I guess hoping his wife would show to yell at the cops. They all went inside with the cops, so I just went home as well. After a while the cops came by and asked me if I wanted to press charges. I asked them if they felt like they scared the neighbor enough to stay away. I got a small smile and yes, about him, but the wife had just kept shouting at them and her husband about the little. Living next door. I told them no for now, asked them if I'd be allowed to get an extra camera set up on the wall between my garden and the road, to cover the entire front garden plus driveway. They said that's allowed as long as it's on my side of the wall. So, now I'm getting an extra camera installed. One neighbor knows I'm done messing around, but his wife isn't there yet, and if I ever catch any of them again, the cops will be called and possible charges will follow. Back in November 2018, I was arrested at work in front of my boss and coworkers. It was the most humiliating thing I've ever experienced. I later learned at the police station that I was being charged with multiple felonies. This came as a huge surprise. Luckily, I was able to keep my wits and lawyer up instead of speaking with the detective. For $13,000, which completely wiped my savings, I was able to retain a criminal defense attorney. However, it cost me everything, and I was unable to pay my bond. This resulted in me staying in jail for a total of 54 days. At a status hearing, my attorney presented video evidence of me gassing up my car 3 hours away from where the crimes took place, and I ended up having all my charges dismissed. When I finally got out, I learned that I had lost my job, was in the process of being evicted, and my son was in the state's care. His mother is a heroin addict, and I haven't spoken to my own parents in nearly 15 years. They wouldn't let him go to my girlfriend because they didn't consider her family. Since my release, I've learned that I can't sue the police, and no one gives a shit that I was locked up for 54 days because the detective did poor investigation work. I've gone to the local press about this and was told that what happened to me happens quite a bit. They took down my info but never followed up. So what I did was create a website sharing my story. I also uploaded the police report and some other documents from the discovery. Literally, the only reason why I was arrested was because an eyewitness said they saw me. If the detective had done his job, he could have verified that I wasn't even in town on the day the crimes took place. This is what pisses me off the most. My life was ruined because of a lazy employee. My website is now ranked number 2 on the first page of search results when you type in my town's name. I live in a touristy town, and we attract a lot of visitors over the summer. My web traffic has more than quadrupled, and apparently it's gotten someone high up's attention. I received a cease and desist letter recently, which I showed to my attorney. He said sharing my experience online isn't illegal, and that everything I had stated was a fact or my own opinion. protecting me from a defamation lawsuit. Yesterday I received a visit from 2 officers and the detective who had arrested me. He apologized, stating mistakes can happen. They then talked to me about my website and asked if I could remove it. I said I would delete it on the condition that the detective leave his job and never do police work again. Suffice to say that isn't happening. After the visit I received, I'm more pissed off that the only reason the detective apologized to me was to get me to take down my website. I don't plan to, and the only one supporting this is my girlfriend. My friends think I'm being spiteful and have suggested that I just delete it. I am 33 years old. I had a serious drinking problem since a young age. My dad was an alcoholic, so booze never lacked in our house. It nearly killed me when I was only 27 and was in the for alcohol poisoning. It was too close a call, and after that things had to change. With my wife's support, I went to rehab and proud to say I've been sober 51//2 YRS. My flatmate invited our friends over yesterday. It was 7 of us in total, including his friend, Mark. I've met Mark maybe 3 to 4 times over the last 2 years, and while we're friendly, I honestly don't know him that well. But you can tell he's a party guy. Likes to get loud, take shots, makes gross comments sometimes, etc. Mark brought several cases of beer and a bottle of tequila with him, so everyone was drinking and having a good time. Mark kept offering me drinks the entire night, which I'd politely decline. It's like he made it his personal mission to get me to drink by egging me on. Saying every time he sees me I'm either drinking a soda//water and it's okay to let loose sometimes. He resorted to teasing me into drinking, calling me princess. I don't know what that had to do with not wanting to drink. All my friends there knew what I was like before, how bad my drinking was, so they kept trying to steer the conversation so he'd forget about me. But every now and then he'd hand me a shot glass or a beer and would not let it go even after telling him yet again that I didn't want to drink. My wife became uncomfortable with his behavior. I think she was worried I'd actually drink. She grabbed the shot glass from me, dumped it in the sink and told him to stop it already. He looked between us and grinned like he understood now. Mark joked that maybe we should get my wife drunk first, then that'll get her to loosen up the leash she has on me. I'll admit, that made me see red. I got in his face and told him, actually I don't drink because last time I did I almost King died, so unless you want me puking everywhere and having seizures you should shut up and leave my wife out of this. Wiped the smile off him real quick and he apologized. The rest of night went on and he finally left me alone. Our flatmate did confront me in the morning because he thinks I was too honest with Mark, and it wasn't his fault, he didn't know. He was just joking around and I made him feel bad. Our other friends agree he was being too pushy and deserved being told off. My wife agrees, so he's the only one right now that's taking Mark's side. He said I could have ignored him until he gave up instead of bringing up an uncomfortable truth from my past. Now yes, I could have just told Mark the truth without full details, but felt that's none of his business and a no should have been enough. I only got carried away when he decided to include my wife in his jokes. So yes, I am wondering if I was a bit of an a-hole for what I told him instead of keeping the peace. I have been with my partner for 7 years. We initially met online, and after meeting in person a few times and realizing our affection for one another, we found it promising to move in together. I moved from California to Pennsylvania to be with him throughout graduate school. All was seemingly well during this time. I have never really had any reason to not trust him. I encouraged him to very much so, to try his best to make friends, or to explore hobbies on his own outside of the various ones we share, because I have my own passions. And I found we connected most when we met in the middle through conversations about these passions, through the act of explaining or showcasing what we've taken in or learned. Throughout these 7 years, he has struggled with very low self-esteem. And though I don't necessarily think of myself as the pillar of self-love, the depth of mine doesn't reach the low perception of his self-value. Because of this, he has seen and stopped seeing both a counselor and a therapist, and has been on medication to help for the last 6 months. Things were seemingly well between us, and continued to be pretty fluid. We continued to share things, and take long walks, and were pretty open-ended about where we stood in the relationship. If one was feeling a bit of an ebb, the other would pick up more of a share, and vice versa. However, things took a bit of a dip about 2 days ago when I felt the ebb and asked him about it. Initially, he said there was really nothing wrong. And perhaps I was just feeling this way because with our schedules we haven't been able to see one another for long periods of time like we are used to, which is true. But the feeling continued to irk me, and when I asked about it a second time, he confessed to me. He had begun talking to another girl from another country via Instagram direct messages. And though things between she and him never crossed the boundaries of platonic friendship, he really loved the initial rush of someone asking him questions about his favorite movie, his favorite album, his favorite book. All things he and I already know very well about one another. I asked if he'd sent any selfies or anything risque, and he said no, though I can't confirm, because he deleted the messages. A good deal of me believes him, because of how open he was about the initial conversations to begin with. We slept apart, and I just felt really confused the entire night, because I couldn't really resonate with wanting that sort of attention from someone else. If anything, his yearning for that type of attention sort of hurt. It felt like I wasn't doing enough, or giving enough. The next morning, though I don't have an Instagram, and am not on the app, I went to check his using the desktop version, and found that posts where he once called me the love of his life, or a specific post with a gift I gave him that once said, "Greatest gift from the greatest girl," were still on his profile, but the words, girlfriend, or love of my life, were completed erased. With this realization, my confusion and hurt turned to very real heartache. I called him and asked if he had deleted these words from the specific posts, and with shame, he said yes, he did. When I asked why, he said it was because he just didn't want the attention from the girl asking him about himself to be disrupted if she found out he was in a long-term relationship. I guess this is where I asked the obvious and questioned why someone who is just asking about your favorite books, movies, etc., would be driven away by the fact that you have a girlfriend. And he said he didn't know why he did it, and that it was a massive mistake. At the risk of seeming toxic, and I will take full accountability for seeming so or being so, I asked him to please deactivate his Instagram for the time being while we sort through this, his Twitter as well. He did, and though I was feeling a bit of relief about that, I couldn't help but feel a bit saddened that he didn't choose to do that on his own for the benefit of our relationship. He had to wait for me to ask. Which again, just made me feel like such a toxic and controlling partner. Two things I always strive to be so far from. When he got home from work, we discussed everything at massive length, and he continued to swear up and down that these conversations pertained strictly to music, movies, and books, and he didn't have interest in her. Just interest in the initial rush of the attention he was receiving. We read a few articles, and he broke things down to me as his self-esteem has never been lower. Despite his career as a doctor being at a high, and his finances in order, he felt things with his music weren't taking off. And with that came a feeling that he wasn't special, and it was nice for someone to make him feel that way. I felt shame and asked him if I wasn't doing enough or giving enough to him to make him feel that way. He said, I defiantly was. But my love, and attention and affection, became a pillar he could rely on, and got used to, so with new attention came a rush. And he liked that. I asked him if he wanted to be single, and find that rush in dating new people. And he kept insisting that that's so far from what he wants. He wants to remain a couple, and do all he can to work on these things together. Though I can't help but correlate that feeling he enjoys with the feeling of a first date. Which hurts, of course. I told him I didn't really see how we could move past this because there was nothing much for me to make an attempt to work on moving forward. This seems to be a self-stemming problem that I emphasize with, but just don't want to be on the receiving end of the counter effects. So though it is incredibly uneasy to begin to think of how difficult it'll be to begin again, it is just as difficult to think about how difficult it would be to stay and try to rebuild back up an issue that I feel like just a bystander. When it comes to this has all been very painful, and if this comes to an end I just want it to be as civil and as possible. He deserves to love himself, but not at the expense of the love we have between us. I deserve love that is stable and comforting, and not laced with newfound paranoia. Despite this all, my heart is still very much in this, of course, and he has been very vocal about how it was just one mistake. Nothing happened, we can work through this, etc. And I secretly keep hoping he will make a step, any step really, to showcase these words and implement action, seek a new therapist. Find the two of us a relationship counselor, buy a book on self-help or on how couple conquer affairs, anything at all. Without me having to be the one to ask him. I just want him to have that yearning that he continues to say he has, but instead of saying it, I was him to show me. That makes me irrational or just plain dumb. I believe to be in a state where I can handle either answer. Or something completely different just the same. Do all think I'm blowing something completely out of proportion? Given how this was an exchange of conversation between him and another girl for just a few days. And his erasure of me on his profile was only for about 2 days? This has been a first in this relationship, this has been a first in my life truthfully. I just felt completely vulnerable and isolated.